Good evening, everyone. I am Arushi Kulwal, and today we are here with another informative session at InfoSec Girls. Today we have with us Supriya Golla. She is having 5 years of experience working as a senior security analyst with Prime Healthcare. Her area of interests include web network, secure SDLC, API pen testing, senior security analyst with Prime Healthcare. Her area of interests Her area of interests include web network, secure SDLC, API pen testing, and mobile application security. She has experience working with banking, retail clients, and healthcare industry, and she is skilled in breaking into highly secured environment. Today, she will be telling us about defending broken access. All the best for the session, Supriya. Over to you.
Thank you, Arishi. Uh, Hello, everyone. Good evening. So, today we are going to discuss here about defending broken access control in .NET. So, I'm going to present that to you guys. So, one second. Yeah. First of all, uh, we'll go with the contents, what we are going to discuss over here. So these are the contents we are going to discuss over here. Broken access control, difference between authentication and authorization, example for authentication and authorization, improper authorization consequences, access control policy types, implementing policy in .NET, and how we can prevent IDOR vulnerabilities in an environment, and remediation for authorization and references. So let's move into the topic. So first of all, what is broken access control? Before knowing about broken access control, first we should know about the access control. Access control is also called as authorization. So in web application, or not only in web application, in any thing, an application grants access to content or functions to users whether they are having access or not is called access control. So normally people think it is easy to solve this vulnerability, but it is very difficult to implement properly. So authorization, it is a process in which server determines whether the client is having permission or access to particular resource or a file. So attackers can exploit these flaws to access unauthorized functionality, and to get sensitive information, sensitive files, to modify anything in database and all, to access like a high rights and all, to delete or to edit anything. So they will use broken access control and they will perform all these activities. We'll go into next. Uh, what is authentication and what is authorization? First of all, before knowing about access control, we should know about what is the main difference between authentication and authorization. Because people will confuse normally, but this is totally different. Authentication means it is a process or action verifying and identifying a user. You can do that using three bases. One is what you have here. I have shown here what you have, what you know, what you have, what you are. So you can authenticate a user based on these things: what you know, username, password, and what you have, RSA token, and what you are, whatever you are, like your biometrics, your iris scanning, all those will consider as authentication. Next, we have to use all these things to authenticate a particular application or a device. Next, authorization. What authorization is? What permissions you are giving to particular person to access a device or a resource or a file. So this is the main difference between authentication and authorization. Let's sorry Let's take an example for authentication and authorization. Let's take an example of an university. So, suppose a university is there. So, the university will have a website. So that website will the complete university will have students, professors, administrators, everyone. So the information of university information can be viewed by any of them by simply putting their username and password, which is an authentication. When it comes to authorization, there is a data in a university. There is a data like student report card, read only, which should be read only by a student. So that can be only accessible to view the data which is accessible by the student should be only in view mode. It should not be editable by student. So this is an authorization. So the professor can edit the data, but when it comes to student, he can only view the data whatever is assigned to him and his account. So these all things you can put it in web config file. You have to configure in such a way. Next, consequences of improper authorization. So what are the consequences for the improper authorization? These are the four consequences, like a privilege escalation, path traversal, sensitive data exposure, and presence of insecure direct object reference vulnerabilities. So first of all, we'll go with privilege escalation. So privilege escalation means which are not accessible, which should not accessible by you, can be accessed, is called a privilege escalation. There are two different types of a privilege escalation, which are horizontal privilege escalation and vertical privilege escalation. When it comes to horizontal privilege escalation, same level of access, when you are able to get that information or get that same level of access, then you will call it as horizontal privilege escalation. When it comes to vertical privilege escalation, you are going above your access and getting that information, which is called vertical privilege escalation. Let's take an example. So like previous, the one university one, we can take an example. So privilege escalation, like when it comes to horizontal privilege escalation, you can take an example of student profile. So student is able to see the report card of his own. He should not see the others. So if he is able to see other students information, then we can call it as horizontal privilege escalation. When it comes to vertical privilege escalation, is if he is able to edit any data of the professor, what of his own report card or some others report card, if he is able to edit that information, then we will call it as vertical privilege escalation. Next, path traversal. So path traversal is, so traversing the path to the server, path of server. So there are so many sensitive files will be there in the server. So if you are able to retrieve all those information through the application from an endpoint, you will call it as path traversal. Next one is sensitive data exposure. You will get sensitive information by simply doing access, by simply broken the access. Suppose if you are able to get other students information, or if you are able to get any PHI data, PCI data, or any sensitive information like what else, all financial or payment related data, then you will call it as sensitive data exposure. Next one is presence of IDOR. So presence of IDOR. So it is a type of access control actually. This vulnerability arises when an application uses user supplied input to access objects directly. Like suppose the application will have all if the application is having any static information which can be viewed by a user or a person. So if he is able to change one thing and he is able to retrieve the others information, then you will call it as insecure direct object reference. Next, these are the consequences will happen if access control is not properly implemented. Next, we'll go into next one. How you have to control all this. You have to create a policy to implement proper access control. You can do that based on these four types of access control policies. So first one is role based access control. Next one is discretionary access control. Next one is mandatory access control, and the final one is permission based access control. Let's go into role based access control. First of all, what is role based access control? So role based access control is like giving access to any user based on their roles and responsibilities within an organization. So it may be based on the organizational policy or the standard they are using. Let's take an example of a hospital. A hospital will have several roles like a doctor, a patient, nurse, attendant, and the IT related people and all. So everybody will have their roles and responsibilities. So the data which they are accessing should be accessible by them based on their roles and responsibilities. Next one is discretionary access control. So discretionary access control is like restricting access control based on their identity of users, which means like suppose I have joined an organization, there will be a in an organization there will be a departments types. So based on the groups, based on the department, they will provide access. So in discretionary access control, a user will get their access based on their group they belongs to and all. So next one is mandatory access control. Mandatory access control mostly used by a secure systems like a military services or any government services. They will use this mandatory access control, and it is very expensive to implement mandatory access control. And in this mandatory access control, documents will be labeled based on the documents. The access will be based on the labels. So the labels like confidential, secure, and it depends of the organization. It depends on the resource. It won't be anything like roles or any department. Every resource will have their own label. Based on that role, they will provide access. Next one is permission based access control. Permission based access control is like providing permissions to any user, like permissions like read, write, delete, modify, all these things. So based on that permission, they will get access. These are the four different types of access control policies. So next, we are going to discuss. Sorry, we are going to discuss about authorization implementation in ASP.NET. So, how to implement authorization in ASP.NET, we are going to discuss now. So, what I'm going to discuss is ASP.NET Core Authorization. So, they provided four different models of authorization implementation. So, those are simple authorization, role based authorization, policy based authorization, and claims based authorization. Let's move to first one, simple authorization. Before we go into implementation, we should know here two terms. First one is authorize. If you see in the code here, authorize, this is the attribute we should know. And allow anonymous, these are the two attributes we should know. So to implement authorization here, we should actually implement these attributes to the code, to the controller or any method. So here in this example, there is a controller and there are two methods. So authorize I put here, like authorize, when authorization will come, first a user is completed his authentication, then authorization will come. So the user is completed his authentication. Now here he came. So what happened here is like In this I am giving authorize to this controller, which means if he is having authorization, then only he can access this particular data, these actions. So here I mentioned hello anonymous. So in your website you can you will put a login page and logout page. So who can see login page is like without authentication also anyone can see anyone can see the web application login page. So I mentioned here hello anonymous, so which means a login page can be viewed by anyone. So next one is authorize. I put authorize here, which means the controller. Here I specifically mentioned allow anonymous to login page, which means that can be accessible by any person. When it comes to logout page, if you log in, then only you can see logout page. Otherwise, you shouldn't. So that is the reason authorization came here. So the controller is having that authorize term, so they can see once they log in into the application. This is the way we have to implement in simple authorization. Let's move into next one. So role based authorization. What is role based authorization? Like before, how we discussed about RBAC implementation, here also there will be roles and responsibilities. Everybody will get their access based on their roles and responsibilities. Here we will implement, sorry, it moved into another one. Yeah. So here if you see, there are two different roles. One is administrator and another one is power user. So I mentioned here authorized term and roles in the first one, which means the complete set of this controller will have access to only these two roles, administrator and power user. When it comes to set time and shutdown, only administrator can view that, only administrator can do that action. He will go into this shutdown thing. He can't do set the power user can't do shutdown shutdown of a device or anything. So based on the roles will provide authorization. We have to implement this authorize and roles for every controller which we want to give access. Next one, policy based authorization. Policy based authorization is mainly for creating a policies and giving access to giving access based on the policies. So we will mention the policies in the startup.cs files. After that we'll use all these policies for our code. So here if you see, let's take I took an example of minimum age requirement 21. So let's take an example of like marriage certificate or anything. He can register that based on the age. So I took a parameter and I took a requirement, minimum age requirement 21. I assigned this is to a policy called at least 21. So I created this policy in startup.cs file. Next what I have to do is I have to use this policy. So whenever I have to use this policy, I will mention in authorized term, authorized attribute policy equals to particular policy name. So this is the way we have to create in policy based authorization. Next one is claims based authorization. So the same way how we created policies, we have to create a claims. Here we are creating a claims for an employee to view data based on his employee number. If he put employee number, then only he'll get such a data. We are creating that claim in startup.cs file. So in that file we created this policy which is employee only. Then we have to use the same claim in our controller or our method in authorized attribute policy equals to employee only. So this is the way we have to implement. These are the four different techniques in implementation of authorization in .NET. So next one. So we discussed earlier about the IDOR. So how to prevent that IDOR? Uh, Let's here I took an example of idor mainly will happen if the static id see here I took an example of id and all. If you change the id, you will get others data also. See here where user equals to id and return value details. So whatever id you provide, suppose let's take an example of sequence number of ids, like 7 or 8 something and all. So if you mention the other id and all, it will show you others details also. How to restrict that? You have to restrict here user id equals to, if the identity of that user and this id mentioned in the code, if both of them are not matching, then you should restrict that access, like permission is not there for you and you don't have permission, all these error messages you have to show them, and you should restrict like this. So this is the prevention to idor. Next, these are the remediations you have to take while implementing the authorization into the application. uh, so you should invalidate tokens and cookies after logout. Next, you have to force login or logout once the password of the user change. And server side resource restrictions like directories or sensitive files, like web.config files, all things you should restrict to get for a user. Next, restrict access to all resources basis roles. So based on their roles, they should get the resources. And model access control should enforce record ownership rather than accepting that the user can read, create, update, or delete any record. Next, disable web server directory listing and ensure file metadata and backup files are not present within web routes. And we'll find actually these type of sensitive information mostly in the insecure applications and all. We should restrict all these metadata for accessing of any user, of normal user actually. And next, you have to log access controls and alert admins when appropriate, like you have to take all logs or whoever used what data and everything. Next, rate limit for api, you have to restrict rate limit and control access to minimize the harm from automated attack tooling. So this is very easy attack to do, so you have to restrict rate limit and all. Next, JWT tokens should be invalidated once the server after logout. So developers should actually take care of this type of data before they are implementing all these things in an application. So these are the references I gone through and done this. Thank you. Yeah. Hello.
Hey, yeah, Supriya, thank you for the session. Thank you for that comprehensive information about broken access control. It was an informative session, and we don't seem to have any questions as of now. So, thank you
Okay.
for the session.
Yeah. Thank you, Arishi.
Yeah.
Yeah.